Okay, the wait's over. Here comes part two. And hello, Internet. Welcome to part two of our coverage of why there's such a bias in the playoff committee and the media polls out there when ranking teams from smaller conferences, specifically the American Athletic Conference. And for those of you who missed part one of the subject matter, please look in the description down below. There's a link will bring you to part one. Go watch that video, catch up, come right back, and we'll go into part two for you. We'll wait. Don't worry, we'll be patient. And for those of you new to the channel, we are here covering college football every week, breaking down teams' top 25s, doing deep dives, and covering various subject matters of college football. So if you enjoy any of that, please consider subscribing. And with today's video, I put in so many hours of research and preparation. I actually already filmed this, and I'm actually revising a lot of it. So for those of you who missed part one and refuse to watch it, just know that at some points I'll have a beard, and other points I'll be clean shaven because I wanted to make sure I get the subject matter right and I deliver it right to you, the fans. So with that being said, without further ado, let's jump into part two of why the playoff committee is showing such strong bias against teams from the American Athletic Conference. Enjoy. So if the playoff committee isn't using strength of schedule and they're not using a team's total offense and defense to try to come up with their top 25 rankings, is it possible that strength of record is the answer? Well, first, let's try to figure out what strength of record even is. The way strength of record works is it's based on the chance of an average top 25 team having the team's record or better, given the opponents the team has played and where they are played to date. So this only makes things more confusing because we're not using strength of schedule to exactly define top 25. We're not looking at the team's total offensive defense. So reading that definition, well then how do we define a top 25 team and how do we define what record they could possibly have? Well, the problem is I've actually Googled everywhere trying to break down the formula, looking at the metrics, trying to figure out anything that would show us how to calculate strength of record. And the problem is I couldn't find anything. If you could possibly find something, let me know in the comments down below. I'd really like a breakdown of how this is calculated because as of right now, there's no way for me to calculate this because we can't clearly define what a top 25 team is. So what other metrics could we use to try to determine a top 25 team? What even consists of a top 25 team? Well, that could lead us into recruiting. So you figure if you're going to determine a top 25 team and if you're going to determine what makes a Power 5 conference, you have to figure these guys must be doing a stellar job recruiting and bringing the best talent to their teams, building up their conferences, and that's how we determine a top 25 team. So what I did is I looked at the past 4 years in recruiting because I figured that's going to make the majority of your current team with the exception of some redshirt seniors. When looking at each team in the respective conference, what I found interesting is that the Power 5 conferences actually made the top 5 recruiting classes over the past 4 years on average. But who's number 6? Well, that would be the American Athletic Conference. And now you might be thinking, those rankings, they don't mean anything. You don't know anything about these players until they get on the field and start playing some real football. And then we'll see who's the cream of the crop, who's the one that rises to the top, and who moves on to the NFL and makes a dream career winning those Super Bowls. Well, I looked at that as well. One thing to note is the average length of an NFL career is 3.3 years. So I figured, let's look at all the active players currently in the NFL. So looking at that, when you know it, again, the top 5 Power 5 conferences lead the NFL in active players. And who's the 6th? Again, the American Athletic Conference. What a coincidence. So there's our answer, right? Great talent determines great conferences and great teams in college football. Well, kind of. Here's the thing. Of the current top 25 teams, only 12 of those teams were in the top 25% of recruiting classes of over the past 4 years. And who's really interesting is teams like USC, Texas, Tennessee, who are all the top 25, but yet are ranked out of our AP and our playoff committee top 25 rankings. There are teams that are really struggling, specifically teams like Tennessee. And another thing to note, teams like Vanderbilt, who went on to lose to UNLV, who is considered a top 25% recruiting class over the past 4 years, they're really, really struggling this season. So, how does any of this make sense when it comes to the talent? Clearly, coaching has to play a factor into this, right? So now we're starting to get somewhere because we determine that great talent doesn't necessarily mean great teams. Because if that was the case, then the SEC would be number 1 through 12 every year. But that's not the case. You have struggling teams there. And this year specifically, you have a team in the Big Ten who, on average, has recruited number 3 amongst Power 5 conferences, but yet is the clear number 1 conference this year, especially when you have Ohio State as the clear number 1. As of right now, the Big Ten Conference is the best conference in college football. So if we can agree that this conference, who ranks number 3 in recruiting, can jump up 2 spots to number 1 this year as far as their production, is it crazy to think that a conference in the American Athletic Conference, currently ranked 6th in recruiting, could possibly outperform teams like the Pac-12 and the ACC to jump to number 4 best conference? Is that wild? Is that something unreasonable for us to agree upon? So I would argue, no, that's not crazy, because if the AP polls all season and now the playoff committee is now giving us 4 teams from the American Athletic Conference to be in the top 25, but only 2 teams from the ACC and 2 teams from the Pac-12, it's not crazy to say that the American Athletic Conference as a whole is currently a better conference than those 2. It's not crazy to say that they could jump up 2 spots and be a top 4 conference. That's not crazy to say for this particular season. I think that's a fair estimate. Why is it we can't agree to apply the same metrics that the committee and all these analysts on Fox and ESPN and CBS are using to determine top 5 teams for the playoffs, to use strength of schedule, to use strength of record, which I have my issues with that because there's really no transparency that's calculated. But to use a team's total offense, total defense, to use all of that towards certain teams and not applying towards others, I think if we would apply this all across the board, I think you would find that the rankings should be not that much different than what I currently have calculated. And for that, I think there's a huge bias when it comes to not only the AP polls, but the playoff committee. And I think it's unjust, and I think that there should be more respect for the American Athletic Conference. Am I saying they are the best conference? No, I'm not even saying they're the 3rd best conference, but I don't think it's crazy to say that at least 1, I would argue 3 of their teams should be in the top 10 at this current place in time. Will that play out as I continue to calculate this as the season goes on? No, most likely not. But should one of those teams be considered for a New Year's Six Bowl? Absolutely. I think that the American Athletic Conference has been underrepresented when it comes to the AP polls and also the playoff committee polls. I think it's unjust for SMU, who was ranked number 15, to drop 10 spots when losing to another top 25 team. That hasn't been applied when Georgia lost to South Carolina. That wasn't applied when Wisconsin lost to Illinois. That wasn't applied when Michigan beat Notre Dame. So I think that's really unjust how you treat this conference, because they are great. I'm not saying they're a top 1, 2, or 3 conference. I'm saying they're currently number 4, and for that should amount to something. But hey, what do I know? I'm just some guy from the internet punching some numbers into a database and hoping they kind of match up to what the public thinks. I'm just trying to be fair. I'm just trying to be just in how these rankings are coming out. That whole reason I created this YouTube channel, the only purpose was to try to bring light to teams that are being underrepresented and try to show that there are teams out there who do deserve to be considered for the playoffs, to be considered for New Year's Six Bowls. That's the only point of this channel. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing and embarrass myself week to week here for you guys. So if that means something to you, please consider sharing this video. So with my final thoughts here on this long-winded rant, I just want to know what you guys think. Is there any basis to what I'm saying here? Should the American Athletic Conference be more respected? What are your reasons for not thinking they're deserving of top 10 spot with SMU, Cincinnati, and Memphis? I'd love to know your justification down below, and let's really engage in this conversation. And if it's something that you think that I have some basis here when talking about all this, please consider sharing this video, maybe getting the word out there. I'd really like to get this message going because I think that this conference is severely underrepresented this season. But with that, I really appreciate everyone's time. Next week, we'll be jumping back into our normal routine of covering some of the big teams out there, doing deep dives. I really want to thank all those who took the time to watch my Penn State video. I was kind of shocked by the reaction and so much love and support from all of you out there. That was a really humbling experience. So it really keeps me going to wanting to continue to build this channel. And again, if you're enjoying this and you want to join in on the conversation, please consider subscribing and trying to build something here, trying to get the word out on teams being underrepresented. Yeah. Anyways, I'll leave it there. I'll see you guys all next week. Goodbye.